Good morning, Trailblazers. Yes, Trailblazers. You are the creative masterminds. You are the awesome innovators. You are committed. You are troopers. In some cases, you have had to pivot your research, but you didn't give up. You know why? Because that's what Trailblazers do. Look at your neighbor and tell them, I'm a trailblazer. I'm a trailblazer. I'm a trailblazer, honey. That's right. That's right. You better know. We have heard from some phenomenal speakers this week, and today we want to fill your cup with just a few more nuggets of information. My name is Danita Woodley, and I have the honor of serving as the division director and supervisor of the grants team at OELA. My journey at the department began in 2004. I started as a program officer, then I went on to be a contracting officer representative, then a team leader, and somehow slid into supervisor. I have worked with several formula and discretionary grant programs over the years at the department. Title I, homeless education, neglect and delinquent, 21st century after schools, just to name a few. But my very first program was the Javits Gifted and Talented program, where I learned early on about the true value of fostering relationships and partnerships. Somebody said relationships. Relationships. Yes, relationships. That word has been ringing in my ears for years. Relationships take time, but today we are partnering with you and others to continue our rich conversation around grant management. To jumpstart the day, we have two resources to tap into, David Downey and Cleveland Knight. In terms of highlights, David, I'll call you Mr. Downey for now to be official. Mr. Downey has a career spanning over 30 years of government service. Yes, 30 years of service, which is outstanding, to say the least. He has worked in virtually every facet of grant administration. He is currently responsible for developing and conducting grant-related training materials for potential grant applicants, grantees, members of Congress, and their constituents, as well as federal and state personnel who work with discretionary as well as formula grant programs. From 2002 to 2008, Mr. Downey served as the Associate Director of Training and Development for the White House Office of Faith-Based and Community Initiatives. He has trained over 100,000 individuals on the principles of grant writing and grant administration across the country. Mr. Downey is a 1993 graduate of Transylvania University in Lexington, Kentucky, where he received a Bachelor of Arts degree in history with a minor in communication. For me, I like to think of him as a walking handbook of the discretionary grant process. He has been so helpful and resourceful, and we have been working for many, many years at the department. Cleveland Knight has over 20 years in the field of education. He joined the department in 2020 and has a wealth of knowledge and experience at the state as well as the local level in K through 12 programs, grant administration, policy, and training. He is currently responsible for data analytics, grant administration, policy development, and implementation to support cross-agency initiatives. He collaborates with offices to develop and implement strategies to target resources that strengthen grant monitoring. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree in sports and event management from Shepherd University and a Master of Education in Special Education from the George Mason University. Trailblazers, grab your pen and get comfortable. You are in for a treat. with the speakers that we have lined up for you today. If you hear something or think of a question later, not to worry, you can always follow up with your program officer by simply sending an email. At this time, please join in with me in welcoming our guest this morning from the Grant Policy and Training Division, Office of Finance at the U.S. Department of Education, David Downey and Cleveland Knights.
Well, I'm not quite sure we can live up to that auspicious introduction, but we'll do our best. Good morning, everybody. What a privilege it is to be with you. This is the first time in 2 years that I've had an opportunity to engage with project directors in person. We've done a lot of training virtually through Zoom and Teams, and those have been fantastic events, some live, some recorded. But seeing you in the room, this is an amazing thing for me, so it's a great privilege. Now, what we're going to do here is we begin this conversation about administering your ed grants. The program team had asked for some specific topics that we're going to discuss. We'll note that in the agenda here in a moment. But let's just cut to the chase. We're going to administer a brief oral quiz, and this will determine whether or not you get to keep your grant for the remainder of the year. Slightly kidding, but Cleveland is taking notes. All right, I'm going to make a statement. And if you agree with that statement, I want you to shout "do." If you disagree with that statement, I want you to shout "don't." Okay? And just as a show of hands here, how many of you would consider yourselves new project directors? Are you new to the fold? Okay. Got a few there. Welcome. How many of you played a role in writing your grants? Almost. All right. So a lot of folks here who are intimately aware and understanding of what was put into the application that was approved. So that's good. All right. So for you new people, pay attention to the do's and don'ts from those that are the experts. So statement number 1, you should promote student achievement in the classroom. Do or don't? Do. Absolutely. Great. That's important. Statement number 2, you should reward student achievement in the classroom by throwing an all-night kegger. Don't. If you learn nothing else during our time together, ladies and gentlemen, please know that the purchase of alcoholic beverages with federal funds is and always shall be an unallowable cost. All right, good. Statement number 3, you should protect the identity and data collected on individuals when carrying out human subject research. Do, absolutely. No joke with that part. That's a very important piece. The next statement is, it's okay to put that information up with their social security numbers on your website or your Facebook page, including David Downey. Don't. Now, I say that with a little bit of joke here, but it is important. It's one of the pieces here. Maintaining the anonymity and ensuring the safety of those individuals that are serving, that are beneficiaries, that are being research subjects. That's a really important piece here. We're going to talk a little bit about that during our conversation. Last, do or don't. You should seek out ways to grow professionally to better administer your ed grants. Come on, a little bit more than that. Do or don't? Do. It's critical. There is so much that has to be done as a project director. I know that. And it can feel a little overwhelming at times. But to do your jobs well, you've got to stay abreast of not only what's going on in terms of the admin regs that we'll talk about here today, but also what's going on in the field of study that impacts your grants. What is the research telling you? What are some of the best practices? You can do some of that right here during this conference, sharing your successes, being candid with one another about some of your challenges, growing and learning from one another as you go. But it is critical for the integrity and success of your grant projects for you to embrace that lifelong learning aspect of continuing to see how well you can do your jobs. So, and hopefully, knock on wood here, this training will If not, answer some of the questions that'll help you growing professionally. It will identify some of the resources to kind of help you as you go forward. Sure. All right. During our time together, we're going to talk to you about forging a partnership between the department and our grantees. We're going to highlight policy updates, including the status of the unique entity identifier, a major change in how we work with organizations after 20 years, the UEI. We're going to talk about administering your ed grants, clarifying key aspects of the protection of human subjects in federally funded research, ins and outs of the 8% indirect cost training rate. We're going to highlight a little bit about that, and managing the carryover and large available balances and identifying key resources as you go. In fact, we have for you and your staff, we're going to talk to you about some grant administration tutorials that you and your team could take. They're about 45, 60 minutes. They're available at ed.gov. We're going to highlight those during our conversation. So with that said, and we're going to take your questions as best we can. We want to be respectful of your time. We know we end around 10 and there's time for a break, but Cleveland and I will be available to take some of your questions as well. Even when we kind of officially close, we can stay a little bit of time and chat with you. Now, when we talk about forging a partnership, it's really important to understand that we're in this together. Now, I know former President, the late Ronald Reagan, said that one of the scariest things you can ever hear is when someone says, "I'm from Washington and I'm here to help." Well, I hope it was a great line when he said it in the 80s. It still will make some people chuckle a little bit. I hope in this interaction that you're having with your program staff that you're seeing that line is more comedy than fact. But we are working together. Our jobs are to help you succeed. We have shared goals, but distinct roles in this process. I'd also want to point out to you folks that sometimes the greatest level of customer service that we could give you is to say no. It is to say denied or it is disapproved. And that's not always something that you want to hear from somebody. But if we are saying that, it's not done, those decisions to disapprove or say no to something, it's not an arbitrary decision or not being capricious. It's grounded in law. It's grounded in regulation. And we're going to be documenting that in our official grant files to make sure that you know that as early in the process as possible. You know, a lot of times in life, they'll say, well, it's better just to go ahead and then ask for forgiveness later. When you're having to repay money, potentially with interest, not so much. So listening to those statements and having that open dialogue is critical. But let's kind of look and see here some of this illustrated list. It's not an all-inclusive list of some of the responsibilities. We want from the department staff, it's really critical that we in grants policy and training, we do our best to work with the teams, that they know the legislation, the regulations, and their applications. And no one is going to know your grant program and your grant projects better than the good folks in OELA. And that's why they're your primary point of contact. But we know we're going to have to know that, and we're going to have to understand what goes into your applications. Same goes for you guys. Know the legislation, know the regs, know your applications. Those of you who played such a role in writing them, you're already ahead of the game there. We provide technical assistance and monitor the grants program staff. So much effort is put into making these awards in a conflict interest and a free, in a free of bias manner, very transparent. We take a lot of pride in that. But ed staff, really, we earn our pay by rolling up our sleeves and carrying out the work of monitoring your grants and making sure that you're on track. Your job is to help ensure those successful programmatic and financial outcomes. And remember, it's not enough to do the job. You have to document that as you go. Maintain strong, good records for the life of the grant, plus how long after the grant? What do you think? 3 years. 3 years after the life of the grant, provided there's no legal issues which would require you to maintain those records until that legal issue is resolved. But 3 years after the life of the grant, Comply with the award terms and conditions that's in the GAN, the grant award notification. Again, documenting this, make sure that you're submitting your reports in an accurate and timely manner. We're going to be monitoring that, utilizing G5 on our end, but you're going to be utilizing G5 as well to submit reports in some cases, certainly to access, draw down the funds. Implement strong internal controls. That's an important piece there that we'll highlight. And obviously, we all want to make sure to close out the grants in compliance with a zero balance. Have a plan for every dollar. And if you don't have a plan for every dollar, I would respectfully say you don't need that dollar. So make sure that you've got a good plan for how you're going to use your funds, and work with the program staff if you have any questions on that. A few tools of the trade. We make sure it's critical that you know your program statute and any program specific regulations. Edgar, the Education Department General Administrative Regulations. Title II of the Code of Federal Regulations. It's grants and agreements. There are several sections. The most important from a grants administration piece would be what's known as the uniform guidance. The GANs we mentioned, the grant award notifications, it's 30 to 40 pages. It's a fairly extensive document. I encourage you to make sure to read it cover to cover. You might want to just skim the directions or kind of the explanation of the main page, but those award terms and conditions are critical for you to understand. At the beginning of every fiscal year, I read one discretionary and one formula with the generic terms and conditions. And I do that so that I can say when I speak to a group such as yourselves, I took the time to read a GAN thoroughly. You have to do that as well. It is the primary way that we communicate. Obviously, email and correspondence. You'll know that when things are coming down the pike, but you want to make sure that you read over the GAN clearly. You are the primary point of contact as the project director for this grant at your institution. You obviously work, you're not employed by the department, even if you're 100% paid with ed funds, but you are kind of the ambassador, the go-between between your organization and ed. So it's incumbent upon you to play that role and be able to explain the responsibilities and expectations that the department has with regards to your organization in meeting its goals and objectives and being in compliance. A quick pointer, a little tip. Let's say, and I hope you're not in this spot, folks, but let's say your boss had said, maybe saying, well, I see this pile of money and inflation is making all our dollars a little less valuable. Is there any way that we could kind of say that this money could go for something bigger? Maybe because you know, you're doing this, but that's still a part of the institution. Can we stretch that in any way? I hope you're not feeling that stress. The quick answer is no, you can't stretch it. It's got to be for the express purpose of the grant. But in your position, very candidly, if you are feeling that, you might not feel very comfortable to say something like that to your boss, the person that you report to, the person that evaluates you. That's where a conversation with us at the department can kind of come into play. And I'm saying this from experience, being a program officer and having a portfolio of grants. Let us play the heavy. It's like, well, boss, if we did this, we're going to be in violation of the regs, and that's going to be a problem. So it's going to come back. We're going to pay the money and plus interest. But that David Downey, he's got eyes in the back of his head. If I'm your program officer, and he's going to find out, he's going to see it, and it's going to cause us issues. It's going to improve the risk profile, increase the risk profile. We can't do it. Use us to play the heavy. Let us play the bad cop, if you will, if there is that pressure. I hope you're not. But I'll tell you, the first project director event I ever spoke at, I had a person come up to me at the end of my session, and they said, when I came here, my boss told me not to talk to those people from Washington. They said, you can smile, you can wave, but don't talk to them. I was really impressed by this person, how candid this individual was, how honest this person was. Also kind of scared and disappointed that somebody's boss would tell them not to talk to us from Washington. But that Reagan-esque quote kind of lingers for folks for, even to this day. So, but the person said, I want you to know, after listening to you, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to communicate with my program officer. I felt really good. I thought, well, that was an hour well spent. So keep the lines of communication open. Make sure that you're aware of the GAN and those things, and communicate with your program staff as you go. The approved application, which keeps you in scope. Most of you played a role in writing that. If you didn't, if you're new, maybe this is the first event you've really been asked to do on behalf of your organization for this grant. Read that application cover to cover. Know what you have said, have pledged to do with federal funds. Live up to that. And again, your own written established procedures within your organization. All right. We go to the next slide. I don't know. Oh, there it goes. All right. With Edgar, big pieces that I want to point out to you here for discretionary grants, Part 75 for direct discretionary grants would be your most useful tool. Because we're talking about it, I want to also bring up Part 97, the protection of human subjects. Those pieces will be, I think, of most interest to you. They're regulation manuals. They're not written as a narrative, but I want you to be familiar with them. You can access Edgar from ed.gov or the electronic Code of Federal Regulations, ecfr.gov. We're 34 CFR, by the way, but 75 and 97 on a day-to-day basis will be your most important pieces. With the uniform guidance, again, 2 CFR 200. So at the ECFR, you want to go to Part 200. Each of these sections has value. Post-award requirements and the cost principles, I think, will be of most value to you on a daily basis. Probably subpart E, the cost principles, but be aware of what's in those sections. And when any question or as you're looking at things on those pieces, contact your program officer to see if you have concerns about what's allowable, what's allocable, what's reasonable with those pieces. And I'm going to turn things over quickly here to Cleveland to tell you about the UEI transition. Cleveland?
All right. Well, I want to start by saying, Ella, you guys did a marvelous job with this transition. I'm going to give you guys some numbers in a second, but Ella is at 100%. Every last one of your DUNS account numbers now have UEIs. Please give yourself a round of applause. As a department, we've changed. As David said, we've 20 years been working with Duns and Bradstreet, a third party, to handle a lot of the administration when it comes to our IDs. And this week, April 4th, the department has changed for an internal process to do the administration work. That will reduce a lot of burden to the grantee, as well as save a lot of money for our taxpayers. There are about 45,300 plus programs that's in G5, which is our preferred system of record. And of those 45,300, we have 27 accounts that are still in the process of transferring into the UEI. So that's less than 0.5% across the department. However, 99.5 wasn't enough for Ella. You guys are at 100%. So again, clap your hands for yourselves. So let's talk about why and some other things. All grantees that has a DUNS account number, all grantees, whether it was active or inactive, have been transferred into UEI, Unique Entity Identification. All new moving forward, if you are a prospective applicant, you are going to be required to register at sam.gov to get and acquire a UEI. And also all of our current grantees will have to maintain their UEI every year by updating or doing annual updates to their UEI. When you enter sam.gov, you'll land on the page. And on the page, you can see where to register, or if you need help to find your ID number, you can also click there, just a few clicks away. Now, there are some resources you can find. I want to highlight 2 of them. The first one, there is a service desk. So you can always contact the service desk for support for grantees or the contracting community, as well as staff. But another resource I really like is the second one also, and that's the frequently asked questions. If you have questions, you may not be the only one with that question. It is detailed explanation of your answers to any questions. Some would be like, where can I find my UEI? If I'm a subcontractor, do I need a UEI? All kinds, and other questions. Please take advantage of that information that's there for you to answer any of those questions. Awesome. All right, David, back to you.
Thanks, sir. All right. One quick thing with the Federal Service Help Desk, and we've seen this with UEI. I'm glad you guys are in great shape. We're dealing with some applicants that are actually trying to submit applications for competitive grants. And there's some issues with that Federal Service Desk. If you have any issues with SAM.gov, fill out that issue ticket completely. Probably even in the text explaining the issues, include like a backup person for them to call. The help desk, which, very candidly, if you put in an issue ticket, and within 3 days, if they reach out to you and they miss you, and we're all busy and it can be tough, they will close out that ticket as resolved, even though the issue isn't resolved and you have to start back from scratch. We're actually working with GSA on this issue with a concern, but for the UEI, you guys are in great shape. We're going to turn things back over now to looking at some other pieces here: protection of human subjects and federally funded research. Now we made the joke there about things, but we want to highlight the importance of the regulations. Again, in Edgar Part 97, it was adopted from HHS. The human subject regulations are referred to as the common rule, and it's multiple agencies have adopted this in various regulatory sections. Part 97 mirrors what you see there and what HHS has in Part 46 of CFR 45. Kind of there, we're 34 CFR, they're 45. To give you a sense of some of those numbers. The human subject regulations, I think, when people think about government regs, they think about red tape, they think about your bureaucracy, they think about holding things up and challenges with time. And there certainly is a truth to that. I'm having some issues with some agencies doing some family business as a power of attorney for my elderly father. I get some of the frustrations folks have. These regulations, they are to ensure that no harm comes to a person. And I think that's an amazing thing. People can do many things with research, but people not being perfect, there haven't been the proper checks and balances to say, well, yeah, we could do this, but should we do this? And what's the long-term implications if we do this to someone? How does this affect somebody emotionally, physically, their reputation? Human subject regulations put layers of protection in place. Dates back to the Nuremberg Code, 1947, following World War II, with the atrocities committed by the Nazis and the war crimes. So when we talk about this, pretty heady, serious things. Driven by what's called the Belmont Report of the 1970s, because frankly, while it was great to kind of point a light to what happened with Nuremberg with the Nazis, across the world, there are people who are part of the good guys, if you were. A lot of bad things have taken place in the name of science and research without regard to human beings. The Belmont Report talked about kind of standards that would help ensure the safety of the individuals being served in these projects. And a lot of the work that gets done today with education grants are not going to be nearly as serious or as concerning as those things, but we have to be mindful of this. The Belmont Report still has great relevance today. I invite you to read through that if you're not familiar with it. Now, want to begin with a few key terms here, and we'll take it broad, and then we're going to bring it back to you and your grant projects. Defining research: a systematic investigation, including research development, testing, and evaluation designed to develop or contribute to generalizable knowledge. Activities that meet this definition constitute research for purposes of this policy, whether or not they're conducted or supported under a program that's considered research for other purposes. For example, some demonstration and service programs may include those research activities. It's collaborative research involves one or more entities jointly carrying out studies under a single grant project. So there's a lot of things here in terms of generalizable knowledge that would fit under this. We're talking to you about it's not enough to do the job. We have to document the job, the evaluations. Many of these pieces could be defined as research. Now, most of the research conducted at the Department of Education would kind of fall into the exceptions of an institutional review board. And we'll see some examples here of what is not research. Scholarly and journalistic activities, oral history, journalism, biography, literary criticism, focus on specific individuals, public health surveillance activities, including the collection and testing of information or biospecimens. Factors include timely situational awareness and priority setting during events or crisis that threatens public health, including natural or man-made disasters. Those things don't fall under the definition of research in Part 97. And again, the updates to Part 97 took effect in 2019. I think the regs were updated maybe in 2018, but I think they were formally adopted at ED in 2019, just in time for COVID. So some of those pieces there about disasters and public health crises, probably more relevant today than even when 97 was set up. But also we want to say what is not research under 97. Collection analysis of information, biospecimens or records by or for a criminal justice agency for activities, and authorized operational activities is determined by each agency in support of intel, homeland security, defense, those kind of things. So we know what is and what is not research. Again, most of the education research takes place would be considered exempt, but we'll kind of highlight a few things though here when you're dealing with minors that has to be looked at, and the importance of the institutional review board. A few key terms: the institution, any public or private entity or department or agency. It includes, federal agencies as well would have to adhere to this. The Institutional Review Board, or the IRB. This is an institutional review established in accord with and for the purposes expressed in this policy. We're going to highlight that. If you have research, and very honestly, when we talk about research activities, the importance of making our awards in the competitive awards in a timely manner, making sure that nothing is held up as certain aspects of components of research are getting approved. We will make awards to agencies while they're still going through an IRB approval in some cases, or if there is some concern whether or not the activities that are being proposed with federal funds at ED meet the definition of research. With that said, we'll make those awards, but we won't necessarily, but the grantee will not be allowed to go forward with certain activities until those potential human subject research activities are either defined as exempt or not exempt. They go through the IRB approval, et cetera. So the IRB approval, the determination of the IRB that the research has been reviewed and may be conducted at an institution within the constraints set forth by the IRB and by other institutional and federal requirements. IRB approvals this might take place in year 2 of a grant. So you can carry on the grant before you get to that year 2, but before that research is initiated, you've got to go through the IRB approval. For some activities, the IRB approval will need to take place on an annual basis based on the way that the research is being conducted to make sure that there's no change in the activities. It's important to know that. Another piece here to say is with the changes to the updates to Part 97, if you have a joint application, and say Downey nonprofit is working with, well, Cleveland State. We'll use Cleveland State as that. Let's say there's, so you've got two folks here, they're going to be two entities. They can only, for this particular grant program, they'll decide on one IRB to clear the research. So we won't go off Downey nonprofit to one, Cleveland State wouldn't go off to another one. We'll have to come together. There'll only be one IRB to approve that. That's an important change there, in effect for the last, say, 3 or 4 years, but it's a big change from what had taken place before that with this. The IRB makeup, and this is important, make sure that you're using an appropriate IRB. Minimum of 5 persons on the board having the qualifications and experience and expertise to promote the welfare of human subjects. No conflict of interest, and at least one person unaffiliated with the institution. Again, conflict of interest free. And when federal dollars, it's real or perceived conflicts of interest or concerns. We also want to make sure with the IRB makeup that you want to be thoughtful of having a board that is diverse with this. It improves the strengths of the organization. It does a better job of understanding the potential dangers to individuals that are being that are participating in the research as subjects. So you want to be mindful of that level of diversity. I attended a human subjects research conference in December of 20. And one of the most powerful sessions that I attended, the speaker pointed out how difficult it was to have a diverse group of researchers to carry out the work. Without that understanding, without having individuals who can better connect to the subjects, there can be a real issue in whether or not their safety and well-being is considered. And some things will just slip through the cracks if you're not experiencing that, if you're not understanding that demographic. So that's an important piece to include. Within the IRB makeup, you want to make sure that you're following the established written procedures of the IRB. Again, having written established procedures and knowing those are critical. Ongoing research, again, must be evaluated on an annual basis, as I mentioned. Ensure subjects receive informed consent as to the project activities and that this consent is documented. With our human subjects team that helps our program staff clear the regulations, I'm struck by how technology has really changed and broadened the concerns of human subject research. 20 years ago, the level of anonymity that adults and children who are participating in studies, that level of anonymity was relatively secure. But today, with the access of information, not just hackers, but just how the available information is, the level of sophistication with algorithms, depending on the target population, depending on the area where the research is conducted, it could much more easily be able to say that David Downey was part of this survey, and David's GPA was this, and David's responses were those, and it's like, okay, he's one of those people that said this. And so there are fewer, technology has changed the way that we're dealing with human subject research, where what was safe, benign research potentially before, because of the way technology is and our access to information, that's changed. We have to rethink how we're capturing data, how we're securing that data to ensure that no harm comes to the individual. Reputational harm as well as physical or psychological harm to them. That's a critical piece. With the board, you want to make sure that they're convening meetings with a sufficient number of members to thoughtfully approve or disapprove the proposed research. And all of those decisions would need to come in writing and, again, documented and maintained. How many of you have worked with an IRB before? Raise your hand if you've worked with one. All right, fantastic, fantastic. So you're in I'll knock on wood, with that level of experience, you're in pretty good shape. Depending on what you're talking about here, if you haven't worked with that, especially I'm saying to some of you new people, communicate, talk to some of the folks who do have experience here and maybe gain some best practices, and make sure any questions that you have, In addition to your peers, reach out to your program staff. We'll make the right connections with our team that clears the human subject research to make sure that we can address those issues as quickly as we can. There is such a thing as an IRB expedited review. HHS publishes a list of research categories in which the studies may undergo an expedited review. Research on the approved list category and the existing approved research with minor changes on that. No proposed research may be disapproved under this expedited review. So keep that in mind. The key is does it fit into those broad categories? If yes, great. If not, then you'll need to go through the standard review. Now, the department may restrict, suspend, terminate, or choose not to authorize an institution's IRB's use of the expedited review procedure. Be very clear and upfront with us at the department on those issues. Also want to make sure that you're aware of OHARP, the Office of Human Research Protection, part of HHS. You got the website there. When you're selecting that IRB, that one single IRB, it would need to be registered with OHARP as you go forward. And there's some additional training. I'll give you a little teaser. We've got an online tutorial for the grantee community on the protection of human subjects that we welcome you to you and your team to visit. We're going to highlight that there in a moment. All right. Now, the role with children, again, because the protection of minors is so critical, the IRB must ensure adherence to the common rule, consider the potential benefits and risks, discomforts of the research of children, and again, the privacy of them as well as what they're actually physically, mentally, emotionally experiencing, assess the justification for inclusion in their research, and determine if a category of subpart D in part 97 applies here. So again, referring back to part 97 in Edgar. With respect to clarifying that, research not involving greater than minimal risk, research involving greater than minimal risk, but presenting the prospect of direct benefit to the individual subjects, research involving greater than minimal risk and no prospect of direct benefit to individual subjects, but likely to yield generalizable knowledge about the subject's disorder or condition, keeping those things in mind there as you read through part 97. Some guidance here, we'd want to note, accurately assess whether the application includes non-exempt human subject research and indicate that in the grant application. If covered research may be involved, plan ahead for the human subjects clearance process. Tell you this right now, part of good grants administration is successfully planning things out, understanding the value of the dollar, understanding your budgets, but building in the right times so that you have the proper clearance with the IRB to initiate the human subject research. Build that time in. Otherwise, those delays will slow your project down, could create carryover potentially, could create a need, maybe, depending on things, to extend a grant project. All of those things you'll need to speak to your program officer about. So properly plan as you go forward. Now, if it is covered research, ensure that staff and our contractors are familiar with the IRB review process to avoid any potential confusion and delays. So if you're working with human subject research, if that's a part of your grant project, certainly especially with minors, but just in general, we want to encourage you, make sure that as the project director, you communicate this information to all of the key individuals that are working with your grant, your staff as well as contractors as you go forward. Applicants should determine how best to select the IRB to review the study for all of your engaged entities. As I said, only one IRB, and that IRB must be registered with OHARP. Institutions may require additional reviews beyond the IRB based on their own institutional policies. So follow those, know what those are in place too. You know, this is, with any federal grant, you don't want to go rogue. You don't want to be opposite what your organization says. But these regulations have such a noble purpose. You want to really be following them closely. Other reviews don't replace the IRB. That's an important other piece. Like, all right, we had 6 of these and they all said yes. I'm sure the IRB is going to say yes, so we don't need to do it. not so fast. Make sure you go through that review. And again, the additional reviews may impact the timetable. So be, proper planning there. That's critical. All right. Now, some additional guidance there. Make sure that everybody agrees up front on the IRB you're selecting. Prepare the proper data management plan to secure and ensure the safeguarding of the information of individuals, and work closely with the ed program officer and our team in GPTD that works with human subjects. Jeff Rodimer and our team, they're moving as fast as they can, but you want to keep the lines of communication open with your ed program officer. They're listed in box or block 3 of the GAN, and our team in human subjects. All right. Now, let's quickly move over to ensuring successful project outcomes. We'll note this with carryover. 200-308 in CFR talks about the flexibilities that grantees have. Now, unexpended funds are carried over automatically without prior approval. In this post-COVID world, there has been a lot of conversations internally at Ed, but I'm sure at other agencies as well, about the level of carryover that we have. We sheltered in place for good reason for a lot of 2020. We wanted to ensure the safety of our staff, our teams. We wanted to ensure the safety of beneficiaries, those that are being served in grant projects. That no doubt resulted in changes in how we do business. It also probably for many grantees increased the level of carryover that you would have from one year to the next. Carryover can be carried, it's going to be carried over automatically. There's a little catch to that, and it can be used for any uncompleted activities and any new activities within scope. And that's important to note. So you can, catch up, or you might have had to kind of rearrange some things within scope based on COVID. You're getting back to the new normal. You can do certain things with that carryover. Have a plan for every dollar. Have a plan for every dollar you have. And if you don't have a plan, I'd respectfully say you don't need a dollar. Now we made a joke about, we're checking on, if you pass the do-don't quiz, you get to keep your grant. No one's keeping score here, but I want to ask this general question. How many of your grant projects, we're not holding you to this at all, how many of your grant projects could use an extra $1,000? Raise your hand if you could use it. Some, yes, not everybody, that's fine. There's a lot of carryover that's moved over. If you have a level funding, if you've got the sufficient level of funding, that's great. I'm not going to ask you if you have too much money. I want you to give plans. I want you to think about ways that you can use the money effectively and properly. We had a conversation with OGC and our Secretary's leadership. And one of the things that we have to deal with, and you're probably experiencing this certainly in your personal life, as we are, is inflation. The cost of fuel. How much does gas cost where you are? Throw out some numbers. How much does $7? Do I hear 8? Do I hear 9? All right. $7. And man, I hope that is a small car that you've got there. California. All right. I say that to point out the pains that we have, but have a plan for your dollars. It could be that inflation will increase costs in such a way that some of those carryover dollars might not be as much carryover. It could be to kind of pay, the end of the day, the bills. I don't know that for all of your organizations and the way costs are. Within an organization, it'll be a little slower. But again, have a clear plan for carryover. We're going to be looking at that. And if you have a plan, to how you're going to be using that during the life of the grant, there'll be less likely for there to be the next year's funding being reduced. I won't say that it won't be, but because we're having to justify and explain things as we're looking at carryover. You need to help us. If you have a plan for those dollars, explain how you're going to be using those dollars, in the next year and throughout the life of the grant, how you're going to do that, knowing that we could reduce funding. So help us justify your need for the carryover, but also because this is your money. And I say yours, I don't mean as the grantee, I mean as taxpayers. It's all of our money. If you can't use that money, be honest and upfront with us and let us know so that we can reallocate funds appropriately. But strive to have a plan for every dollar within scope of the grant so that there is a less likely that there will be reductions or as large a reduction as we're considering. Because this is a conversation we're having across all of our program offices as we speak. Now, with that said, and before we get there, I want to quickly point out issues on the indirect cost. This is a training grant. The 8% cap is the 8% or the actual, whichever is the lesser. For many of our grantees with the negotiated indirect cost rate agreement, the 8% is the lesser. But you want to make sure that you've got that approved negotiated indirect cost rate agreement in place, that you are making sure, and a lot of experience in the room. How many of you know the individuals in the accounting or business office that are drawing down your funds? Raise your hand. All right. Now, if you don't know those folks, homework assignment after you attend this fantastic conference is to go and meet that individual and talk to those individuals. If it's the same person or whoever in that accounting or business office, talk to them about the indirect cost rate agreement. You want to make sure as the project director that you're stretching your dollars properly, that you're not double charging the grant for direct costs as well as indirect costs. Know what goes into your indirect cost rate agreement. Make sure that you've got that in place and follow that. If you only have one grant, it might be in your best interest to just direct charge all of those items as opposed to having a negotiated indirect cost rate agreement. But you do need to have that agreement in place as you're charging that 8% or the actual. Maintain that. And there is some flexibility within the uniform guidance in terms of the time, in terms of how you can maintain that. But it's really critical of you to ensure that you know what goes into that rate and work with folks at your organization that you can account for the dollar so you're not double charging the grant, and that what's in the indirect cost rate does meet the requirements laid out. And with that said, and we'll make time here, provided time, we'll take some questions from the audience. We'll turn things back to Cleveland and talk to you about some of our concerns and what we look for big picture.
All right. Well, I know we only have a few minutes left, but one of things, Department of Education, some of the biggest concerns, we have 3 big concerns that we want to make sure we leave you with. We want to make sure that the project goals, one concern would be the project goals not being met. And another concern would be for the Government Performance Results Act indicators not being met. That will be a concern of ours. Quickly, another concern is excessive drawdowns or infrequent drawdowns, and then poor record keeping or poor fiscal accountability. Those will be our concerns. And then I want to talk about what are indicators for success. Annual substantial progress being met, the Government Performance Results Act indicators being met, good record keeping, good fiscal accountability, and maintaining timelines. All right, I will move on because we got about 5 more minutes. Okay.
All right. So those are our big pieces there for indicators of success. Maintain those records, submit your things on time. I've alluded to this at ed.gov. We have a set, and it's a growing grantee grants administration curriculum. They're about 45 to 60-minute online tutorials for you and your team. You can see all these different classes. You want more about indirect cost? You've got it. Internal controls, so critical. You've got that. Discretionary grants training, cash management, protection of human subjects. We're very proud of all of these trainings. So we invite you and your team and anyone else at your organization that you're having to coordinate with and help explain the regulations in Edgar and 2 CFR. Make sure that you and your leadership and the other folks are all on the same page. These trainings can help you do that. So we'd invite you to visit those at ed.gov. And you can put in the little search box, grantee training. And with the materials here, that link will be able to help you with that as well. Now, a few points to consider at the end. It's important to document your project activities and expenditures. Maintain good records, check the award terms and conditions, reading that fine print, and when in doubt, call your ed program officer and communicate with us. Again, now you might not always like the answer that you get. You might hear a no, but that no is done to protect you and the grant project, maintain it in good compliance with the department. Now, looking at the agenda, this is a full packed day and just a full conference of really some wonderful events. So we really truly wish you the very best in administering your ed grants. Enjoy the conference, stay safe, learn, and we're going to be around to take questions here at the end. So we've got 5 minutes. Okay, so we can take a question if someone wants to come up to the microphones. We're glad to take a question or two. Cleveland and I will be available at the end of the session during the break if you want to ask a question then as well. I want to be respectful of your time. Oh, there's a question right there. Okay.
Hi, good morning, and thank you. If program income increases the size of an award over the 600,000 maximum, is that allowable? And is there a difference if those funds from an LEA come from state versus federal sources?
Now that gets into the program specific pieces about what's allowable there. So I want to turn things back to the program office on that, because that's a program, program income is generally something that is welcome, but that's something I'm gonna have to defer to the program office about with that, because that's a program specific regulation on the minimum maximums. Is there another question? We'll make sure that someone answers that question, but got a question over there.
All right. So my question is, if you have a considerable carryover because of first year and it's carrying over, but we have a maximum that can be spent of 600,000 in our budget, if the carryover goes over that, does that mean we could possibly spend more than 600,000 in a year?
Now this is the 600,000 the cap makes it a little interesting for me, because carryover automatically happens with the grants. So again, that's something else we're going to have to defer back to the program office. I apologize on that, but whether how well they can carry it or use that over, we'll have to do that. I hate to pass the buck on that, but I want to be respectful with the program's requirements. Were there other questions? Or gentleman has something to say.
Hello. Okay. Hi, everyone. And we'll get to this in a second. Francisco here. So the 600K is a cap for NPD. It happens on an annual basis. The way your money works, as most of you know in G5, is that it's a running amount. So presumably we awarded the awards late in 2021. You will have some carryover that rolls over into your new 600K. So you'll have 600K in year 2 plus whatever carryover you have from year 1. And then you have even more money and more dollars to account for. So even more important to have a plan for that. So we'll get into it in my session, but that's just how we would address that question for now.
Well, thank you. Because again, some of our programs don't have minimums or maximums like that. So that's an important point to note. Other questions? And we'll see, I'm 0 for 2 on those. I've had to defer 2, so that's not good. Let's see if I've got another one here, and if I'll do a complete strikeout. Anybody else? It's open. That's right. It's opening day. Well, heck, we lost to St. Peter's on the first night, so I haven't been the same since. Any other questions? Any other questions? All right. We really wish you the very best. Be safe. Thank you all. Thank the program staff. Y'all take care.
Thank you so much, David and Cleveland. We will now head to a break. It's 10 a.m. and we will come back at 10:15. Thank you.